The corridor outside the Alpha King's private study had always been the safest place in the fortress of Kaldemar. Tonight, it became the place where Severin Thales lost everything she had. She had not meant to stop walking. She had been carrying a tray of warmed wine and honeyed bread, the way she always did on the nights Corian dismissed his counsel early, the way she had done 100 times in the 7 months they had loved each other in secret. She had lived inside the fortress for 3 years before any of that, a river village healer hired to the kitchens, a girl he had not even noticed until the night she had set his guard captain's broken finger without making the man feel ashamed for crying. The 7 months were what had made her his. Then she heard the woman's laugh through the heavy oak door. Severin froze with the tray half raised, the wine sloshing against the rim of the silver cup. The laugh was soft, low, the kind of laugh a woman gives only when she is alone with a man and certain of him. It was followed by Corian's voice, quiet, familiar. The voice he used in the dark, the voice he had used with her, the voice she had believed belonged to no one else in the world. "It will be done before the moon's turn," he said. "I give you my word." A pause. The other woman's voice now, smooth as poured silk. "And the girl?" "The girl is nothing." His tone did not change. "A passing favor. She will be set aside before the announcement. You have no rival, Izel. You never did." Severin's hand went numb. The tray tilted. The cup of warmed wine slid sideways and struck the stone floor with a single bright clatter that echoed down the corridor like a struck bell. She did not move. She waited for the door to open, waited for him to step out and find her there, and laugh, and say the words were a jest. A piece of theater he had been forced to perform for some political reason she did not yet understand. She waited for the Corian she knew, the man who had pressed his forehead to hers under the larch trees the night of the harvest moon, and whispered that she was the only true thing in his life. The door did not open. Inside, neither voice resumed. They were listening to the silence she had made. Severin stepped backward, then again. Then she turned and walked, soundless on her soft kitchen shoes, until she reached the servant's stair, and her legs gave way beneath her on the 3rd step down. She sat there in the dark, her shoulder pressed to the cold stone wall, and she did not cry. The crying would come later when she had nothing left to do but feel. For now her mind moved with terrible mechanical clarity. A passing favor. She will be set aside. She had heard the words. There was no mistaking the words. Her free hand drifted, without her permission, to the lower curve of her belly, where the small new firmness had begun 2 weeks ago. The healer in her had recognized it before her heart had let her name it. She had been waiting for the right night to tell him. She had been planning a small ceremony of her own. The candle, the wine, and the words she had practiced in front of her mirror until they came out without trembling. "I am carrying your child." She had been going to say it tonight. A laugh tore out of her, low and ugly, more sob than sound. She pressed her hand over her mouth to keep it in. Above her, somewhere far down the corridor, a door opened and closed. Footsteps. 2 sets. The soft rustle of a long gown. Izel then. Leaving by the king's private way. The way reserved for queens and lovers and no one else. Severin did not need to see the woman's face. She had heard enough. She rose. She wiped her hands on her skirt. She walked the rest of the way down the servant's stair on legs that did not feel like hers. Her room was on the lowest floor, a narrow chamber with a high small window and a bed too short for her. She had been given it the day she had arrived at Kaldemar 3 years ago, half frozen, half starved, with nothing to her name but a cloth bundle of dried herbs and her grandmother's silver ring. The chamber had felt like a kingdom then. Tonight it felt like a coffin. She did not light the candle. She moved by memory. She took the leather satchel from beneath the bed. Into it she put the herbs she would need for the road and for the months that would follow. Then her grandmother's silver ring slipped onto her thumb because her fingers had grown too thin for it. Then the little carved wooden hare Corian had given her on her 20th name day, when he had said, "Carry it with you, so you remember that someone is always thinking of you." She held the hare for a long moment. Then she set it down on the bed, very carefully, as if it were a living thing she was leaving behind. She would not take a single thing he had given her. At the door she paused and looked back one last time. The narrow bed, the cold hearth, the little wooden hare on the blanket, looking up at the ceiling with its painted eyes. "Goodbye," she whispered. Not to the room, to the man she had loved. Then she pulled her cloak tight around her shoulders and walked out into the night. The lower gate of the fortress was tended by old Halric, who had liked her since the night she had set his broken finger years before. He looked up from his brazier as she approached, and whatever he saw in her face made him swallow whatever question he had been about to ask. "Errand for the kitchens," she said. The lie came out flat and easy. He held her eyes a moment longer than he should have. Then he opened the small postern beside the gate without a word. "The road's wet, girl," he said as she passed. "Mind the bridge at Lore's Bend." "I will." She stepped through the postern into the dark, and he closed it softly behind her. And that was how Severin Thalis left the fortress of Kaldamar without saying goodbye to the man who would soon be hunting for her with the strength of every wolf in his kingdom. She did not look back. If she had, she would have seen the figure on the high battlement above the postern gate, motionless against the cold spring stars. She would have seen Corian Vale, Alpha King of the Iron Reach, standing with both hands gripping the parapet so hard the stone cracked beneath his fingers. She would have seen his head turn slowly to follow her small dark shape down the wet road, the way a man watches the last lamp of his life go out. She would have heard him whisper a single word to the wind. No. But Severin did not look back. She did not see the way the Alpha King fell to his knees on the battlement when she vanished beyond the trees. She did not hear the sound he made then, the sound of a man who has just understood, far too late, that the trap his enemies set for him tonight had not been a trap meant for him at all. It had been a trap meant for her. And she had walked straight into the part of it he had spent 9 years of his life trying to keep her out of. By the time the howl rose from the high battlement of Kaldamar, long, broken, a sound that froze the sentries on the southern wall and woke every dog in the lower town. Severin was already past Lore's Bend. She did not hear it. Or perhaps she did, and chose to believe it was only the wind. 4 months later, the village of Brennhold had decided that the woman in the cottage by the fen was probably a witch, and definitely not their problem. It was a kind decision, in its way. The villagers needed a healer. The previous one, an old man named Othic, had died the winter before, and so when the dark-haired woman with the swollen belly and the haunted eyes had appeared at the inn one cold morning and asked, in a voice still rough from weeping, whether anyone in the village had need of her skills, the elders had offered her old Othic's cottage in exchange for what she could do. She had given her name as Ylva, no surname, no history. A young widow from somewhere east, the elders agreed among themselves. Best not to ask. Some griefs are not improved by being prodded. Ylva had accepted the cottage that same afternoon. By the end of the week she had set the splintered wrist of the miller's youngest son. By the end of the month she had brought down a fever that had killed 2 children in a neighboring hamlet. By the time the first heat of summer came, she was simply the healer, and the cottage by the fen was simply her place, as if she had lived there always. She did not, in fact, speak much of anything that did not concern an injury or a tincture. She rose before dawn. She tended her herbs. In the afternoons the people came, the limping, the burning, the bleeding, the women with their quiet questions about their bodies and their fears. She charged what they could pay. From those who could pay nothing she accepted eggs or a pail of milk. At night she sat alone and watched the fire, and waited for the children inside her to remind her, with a soft, small kick beneath her ribs, that she was not yet allowed to die of it. The children were 2. The midwife from the next village had pressed her old hands to Severin's belly and said, "2, my dear, A boy and a girl, unless I am very much mistaken, and I am rarely mistaken. Severin had thanked her and paid her in dried mint, and only when the woman was out of sight had Severin sat down on the stone step of the cottage and pressed her face into her hands. Twins. Of course it would be twins. The first true mate pairing in the Vale bloodline in 9 generations, every old woman in the Iron Reach would have said, will produce children of doubled strength. She had heard the saying once, in passing, from one of Corian's old aunts. She had not understood it then. She understood it now. She understood also that the mark on her hip had not faded. She had checked it every morning for the first month, certain that one day she would wake, and the silver crescent of his teeth would be gone from her skin. Among wolfkind, a rejected bond unmade itself within weeks. She had treated 3 women in the river villages who had been set aside by their mates, and she had watched their marks dim and dissolve like ink lifted from cloth. The body did not make you keep loving him. Hers was making her keep loving him. The mark had not dimmed. It had darkened. It had taken on a faint warmth, like a coal banked beneath ash, and on certain nights it would flare, hard and sudden, and she would wake gasping with one hand pressed to her hip, and the unmistakable feeling that someone, somewhere, was reaching for her. She had also stopped trying to understand the dreams. In the dreams, Corian came to her. He was always at the foot of her bed, kneeling on the floorboards, his hands pressed flat against the blanket as if he were trying to push through it. He did not speak. He looked at her with such ruined eyes that she would wake with her face wet and the taste of salt in her mouth. She knew, in the part of her that had been raised among wolves, that this was not how a broken bond worked. The bond did not haunt the one who had broken it. The bond haunted the one who was searching. She did not let herself finish that thought. It was a hot afternoon late in the 4th month when the peddler came. His name was Tomwin, and he came through Brenhall twice a year, a wide, soft man with a wagon full of needles and ribbons and salt and gossip. Severin sent Maela, the blacksmith's eldest, to fetch her the things she needed. Maela came back with the salt and the needles and a face like a struck drum. Mistress Ilva, he says the king has lost his mind. Severin set down the pestle she had been holding, slowly, as if it might shatter if she moved too quickly. Which king? The Iron Reach, Corianvale. Tomwin says he has been riding the kingdom himself for months, without rest. He says the king burned a whole keep on the western coast last moon, because the lord there would not let his men search the cellars. He says the council has tried twice to take his crown from him on grounds of madness, and twice the king's own warriors have refused to lift a hand against him. What is he searching for? The girl's voice dropped to a whisper. A woman, mistress. Tomwin says no one knows who she is. Only that the king has offered any wolf in the Reach their weight in silver if they bring her to him alive, and that any wolf who brings him news she has been harmed will be torn apart by his own hands. The kitchen tilted gently around Severin. She put one hand on the table to steady herself. The other hand, without her permission, went to her belly. Inside her, both children kicked at once. Hard. Like answering bells. Did the peddler say, she heard herself ask, what the woman is supposed to have done? Mila shook her head. No, mistress. Only that she vanished. And that the king has not slept since. Severin did not remember thanking the girl. When she came back to herself, she was sitting on the stone step of the cottage, the same step where she had wept the day the midwife had told her she was carrying twins, and the late sun was slanting across the fen in long red bars. He had been searching for her, not for the woman in the white silk who had laughed in his study, not for the bride he had promised before the moons turned. For her. Why? Why? She pressed both palms flat against the stone and tried to think. He had said the words. There was no doubt of the words. A passing favor. She will be set aside. She had heard them with her own ears. There had been no drug in his cup, no knife at his back, no enemy listening through the keyhole. There had been only him and the woman called Iselle, and a quiet conversation between two people who had nothing to hide from each other. Unless something else had been hidden, all the while, from her. Severin closed her eyes. She had been so wholly, terribly certain. And now, sitting on this stone step with her belly full of his children and the mark on her hip burning like a banked fire, she felt the first crack run down the surface of her certainty, fine and bright as a hairline of lightning. He had not stopped searching. The bond had not died. The dreams were not dreams. She pressed her fist against her mouth and made a small terrible sound into her own knuckles, and she did not know whether it was a sound of grief or a sound of hope, because she could no longer tell the two apart. A shadow moved on the bog road. Severin's head came up. It was a long way off, but her eyes had been a healer's eyes for a long time, and her eyes were not wrong. A figure on horseback, cloaked. The horse was dark, and the rider's hood was drawn up against the falling sun, and the hood did not turn, did not look this way or that, did not glance at the village as a stranger would. The rider was looking, with the slow, steady gaze of someone who had been told exactly where to look, at her cottage. The mark on Severin's hip flared so hard she gasped. The rider's head turned, not toward the cottage, toward her. As if the flare of the mark had been a struck bell heard from 100 paces away, Severin stood up. She did not run. She did not have the strength left to run, with 2 children in her belly and her mark singing under her dress. She stood, and the rider walked the dark horse forward, and as the cloak fell back from the rider's face, she saw an older woman, perhaps 50, with iron-gray hair cropped short as a soldier's, and a long pale scar running from temple to jaw. The woman drew rein at the gate of the cottage. She did not dismount. She looked down at Severin from the back of the dark horse, and her eyes were a wolf's eyes. That particular slow amber that did not blink the way human eyes blinked. And her face was the face of a person who had been searching for a very long time, and had finally found what she came for. "My Lady Severin," the woman said. Her voice was low, calm and rough as a whetstone. "My name is Marith Olcan. I am the shield warden of the Iron Reach. I have been looking for you since the night you walked out of Kaldemar." Severin's hand went, again, to her belly. "I think," she said, "you have the wrong woman." The shield warden did not smile, but something in her mouth softened, in the way a stone softens when it has been rained on for 100 years. "My lady, I am the one who put your bathwater out for you on the morning of your 20th name day. I have known who you were since the second time I laid eyes on you, and I have ridden 140 leagues in 11 days to say to your face what I should have said to you 4 months ago, before you ever set foot outside that fortress." She swung down from the horse. She came no closer. She stood at the gate, one hand on the post, and she looked at Severin the way a soldier looks at the wounded comrade she has come to carry home. "You did not hear what you thought you heard," Marith Olcan said. "And I am here, my lady, because there are men less than a day behind me on this road who mean to make sure you never learn the difference." For a long moment Severin could not speak. The shield warden waited at the gate like a soldier at a sickbed. Patient, unhurried. The dark horse breathing slow steam beside her in the cooling air. She had spoken her piece. And now she was letting the words do what words do when they fall on ground that has been broken open for a long time. Severin found her tongue at last. "Come inside." It was not a kindness. It was the only thing she could think of that would not require her to keep standing. Marith tied the horse to the gatepost, slid a long, curved blade from its sheath beneath her saddle, and walked it bare into the cottage at her hip. A woman who carried a drawn sword into a stranger's kitchen was a woman who was already certain she would need it. Inside, by the dim red light of the banked hearth, the shield warden took the smaller chair and laid the curved blade across her knees. Severin lowered herself into the larger chair on the other side of the table and folded her hands over the swell of her belly. "Speak," she said. Marith spoke the way a soldier delivers a report, quickly and cleanly. She told Severin that Isel Maran of the Hollow March had not been chosen by Corian Vale. She had been imposed upon him by an old promise sworn in blood at the deathbed of his mother. The Iron Reach had been at war then. The Maran of the Hollow March had been the only house with strength enough to hold the western passes. The price of that strength had been the king's hand. The mother had taken the oath on her son's behalf because the son had refused, and a blood oath sworn over a dying wolf could not be unmade by any hand but the priest who had cut the oath, and that priest had been killed in the pass 2 months later. Corian had carried that oath with him for 9 years. He had told no one. He told no one, Severin echoed. Her voice was very small. Not me, not his voice, not the council. Because the moment the oath was spoken aloud, the Maran would have moved the date forward by every hour they could. He kept it buried. He spent every year of those 9 looking for a way to break it. 9 years, my lady. He had 3 priests murdered hunting for him before he learned to stop asking openly. Severin closed her eyes. And then he found me, she said. And then he found you. And it broke him. There was a long silence. I came to Kaldemar to be a healer, Severin said at last. I did not even know what he was, the first night I met him. I thought he was a guard captain. I know, my lady. He never told me about the oath. No. He let me believe. Her voice caught. She made it go on. He let me believe there was nothing in the way of us, that when the council was satisfied I would walk into the great hall and stand beside him and be his queen. He believed it too. Marith's knuckles were white on the blade. He believed he had time. He had been corresponding with a hermit in the high northern crags for 8 months, a priest who could cut the oath. He was 3 weeks away from riding north himself to bring the man to Kaldemar. And then, someone in the king's own household poisoned that correspondence. The hermit was murdered in his cell 6 days before the king was meant to ride. The body was sent back to Kaldemar in a salt barrel. With it, a letter. The letter said that if the king did not bring Isel Maran into his bed and announce her as his promised queen by the next dark of the moons, every member of his blood would be killed before the moon after. Severin's hand tightened on her belly. His blood? His old aunts. His sister's children. The cousin who fosters in the southern hills. All of them. The Maran have agents in every one of those houses, my lady. The king received the letter on a Wednesday. By the Wednesday after, he had brought Isel Maran to Kaldemar and put her in the chamber across from his study. To pretend. Marith's eyes did not leave hers. To make the Maran believe the oath would be honored, to buy the time he needed to find a second priest, or to put a knife in Isel's throat himself if no priest could be found. He did not love her, my lady. He loved no one in this world but you. The night you heard him in that study, he was performing for an audience of 1, not Isel, the spy he knew the Maran had placed in his own household. He spoke the words because he knew they would be carried back to the Hollow March before dawn. He was buying you another month. The cottage was very quiet. Outside, a single curlew was crying. He called me a passing favor, Severin whispered. Yes, Marith said. And the moment the door closed behind Isel, he went out onto the high battlement, and he wept, my lady, the way I have not seen a man weep since I was a girl. He wept because somewhere in his fortress, in some corridor he could not see, you might have heard him. Severin's mouth opened. No sound came out. And while he was weeping, the shield warden said, he saw a small dark shape walk out of his lower postern and down the wet road. He understood what had happened, and he ran. He ran down 4 flights of his own fortress in his bare feet. He was at the postern within 3 minutes of you, but you were already past Lore's Bend, and by the time he had a horse under him, you were gone into a forest his hounds could not track, because the rain washed your scent off the road within an hour of your passing. Severin was crying. She had not realized she was crying. The tears were coming down her face in long, slow lines, and one of her hands had pressed itself flat against the silver crescent at her hip. He has been searching for me, she said, Every day of the 4 months you have been gone, he has not been mad, my lady. He has been a wolf without his mate, and a man without his soul. He is 2 days behind me on this road. He has been out riding his own escort. He sleeps an hour at a time on horseback. The voice of the council has been writing me 3 letters a week begging me to find you, because the voice is afraid the king will ride himself into his grave. I rode ahead of him because I wanted you to know the truth from a mouth that loved you before you saw his face again. You deserve that much. Severin pressed both hands to her belly. The children were still, listening. There is more, Marith said. Tell me. The shield warden reached into her riding coat and drew out a folded square of parchment. She laid it on the table between them. The wax was dark green. Stamped into it was the sigil of a closed hand within a circle. Taken 3 weeks ago from a Marin courier on the southern road, she said. We killed the courier. We let it be known the courier had vanished into a flood. The Marin do not yet know we have it. Severin opened the parchment. The hand was small and neat. 3 lines. The healer girl has been found. She lies in the eastern fens, in a village called Brenhold, in the cottage of the dead apothecary. End her before the Iron Reach claims her. The king will not survive the killing of his unborn. With the line broken, he will fall to madness within a moon, and the hollow march will rise. It was signed with a single letter. I. Severin read it twice. She set the parchment down and looked at her own hands. They were steady. She had not expected them to be steady. She had been so angry at him. For 4 months. She had let the anger be the thing that kept her standing when the grief would have laid her down. And every step of it had been her walking the road Isel Moran had laid out for her. The anger was not gone. It had only changed direction. How long, Severin said, before the men behind you arrive? Tonight. Possibly tomorrow at first light. How many? 6. Trained. 2 of them shifters. And the king. A day behind them. He does not know they are ahead of him. Then he will not arrive in time. No, my lady, he will not. Severin laid her hand on the silver crescent at her hip. She thought of Corian on the high battlement, weeping in the cold wind. She thought of the children inside her, who had grown still the moment the shield warden had begun to speak. She had spent 4 months running. She was done running. She lifted her head and met the shield warden's eyes, and her voice when she spoke was not the voice of a healer in a borrowed cottage. It was the voice of the woman an Alpha King had been going to make his queen. Then we will not wait for them on this road, Lady Marith. Outside, the curlew on the fen had stopped crying. The wind had changed, and from somewhere in the darkening trees beyond the bog, a single low howl rose, long and trembling, too far away to be answered, too close to be ignored. The hunters had found the village. Marith was on her feet before the howl had finished. The curved blade left her knees as if it had never been resting there. With her free hand she snuffed the lamp on the table, and the cottage went dark except for the dim red glow of the hearth. Stay behind me, the shield warden said. No, Severin said. Marith turned her head. My lady. I have been hiding behind walls for 4 months. I am not going to die behind one. Where is the second blade? Something passed across the older woman's face that, in a different room and a different century, might have been pride. Marith reached beneath her riding coat and drew a short knife from the back of her belt and laid it on the table. Silver-edged, she said. It will cut a shifted wolf. Do not let it leave your hand. Severin took the knife. Her fingers closed around the leather grip without trembling. She had set 100 broken bones with these hands. She was not going to flinch now. A second howl rose from the trees. Closer. From a different direction. 2 are flanking, the other 4 will come up the bog road. They will not expect us to hold the cottage. I do not want to hold the cottage. There are children in the houses on this lane. Then we go to them first. They went out the back through the kitchen garden. Severin had the silver knife in her right hand, and her left hand pressed flat against the rise of her belly, partly to steady herself, and partly because the children inside her had begun, for the first time in 4 months, to move in a way she did not recognize. A long, slow turning, as if both of them at once had decided to wake up. Across the lane was the cottage of old Halgi the weaver. Marith reached the door first and rapped on it once, hard. Halgi opened it with a candle in her hand and a look on her face that said she had already heard the howls. "Down to the smokehouse cellar," Marith said. "All the children on this lane, now. Go door to door. Tell them the healer says so." The old weaver did not ask a single question. She set down the candle and went out into the lane in her bare feet, and within minutes the doors of the lane were opening one after another, and small dark shapes were moving in a quiet line toward the squat stone smokehouse at the far end of the lane. A third howl rose, very close now. "My lady, we have run out of time. Get them all inside. My lady." Get them all inside? Marith went. Severin stood alone in the middle of the lane with the silver knife in her hand and her back to the cottage of the dead apothecary, and she watched the dark line of the trees, and she felt the mark on her hip burn so hot she half expected the cloth of her dress to scorch. Corian was not coming, not in time. She had spent 4 months pretending he was not coming for any reason. Now she was about to die knowing he had been coming the whole while. And the thought put something very old and still and angry in the middle of her chest where her grief had been. She had asked to be loved. She had asked to be safe. She had asked to bring 2 children into the world with their father's hand on her belly, and she had been denied all of it by a woman in a white silk dress who had stood in a study and laughed. A wolf came out of the trees. It was large and lean, and its fur was the slate gray of river stones, and it did not pause at the edge of the fen. It came at her in a long, low run with its head down and its yellow eyes fixed on her belly. Severin did not run. She lifted the silver knife. She did not know, in the moment, where the thing inside her chest came from. Later she would understand that it had been waiting in her since she was a child by the river, and that it had been the reason her grandmother had pressed the silver ring into her palm on the day the old woman died and said, "Wear this until you understand why I gave it to you, and then you will not need it anymore." She only knew that as the gray wolf gathered itself for the leap, something inside her, under the silver mark, under both of her children, under her ribs, opened. A clear, cold light came up out of her skin. It was the color of moonlight on snow. It rose out of her in a thin, perfectly silent sheet, and the wolf hit it the way a thrown stone hits the still surface of a pond, and was thrown back, 4 full strides, with a sharp, small sound of yelping pain. Severin stared at her own hand. The silver knife was glowing in it. Not glowing. Answering. The light from her skin and the silver of the blade were the same light. They had recognized each other. The gray wolf scrambled to its feet. Its yellow eyes were wider now, and the look in them was not the look of a hunter. It was the look of a creature that had just understood it had been sent against the wrong prey. It turned to flee. A second wolf, black this time, came out of the trees behind it and cut it down with one clean lunge. The black wolf did not look at the gray. It looked, with eyes the color of dark amber, at her. Severin's knees gave way. She caught herself with one hand on the low garden wall and stayed upright by force of will. The black wolf walked forward. Slow. Each step deliberate, blood on its muzzle. It came to within 4 paces of her and stopped, and laid its great head down on its forepaws on the dirt of the lane, and did not move. It was the oldest gesture of the wolf kind. The gesture a male made to his mate when he had failed her, and knew it, and was offering her his throat. The cold light went out of Severin's skin all at once. She was crying again. "Corian," she said. The wolf did not lift its head. "Corian, get up." He did not move. She walked to him on legs that should not have carried her, and she lowered herself to her knees in the dirt of the lane in front of him, with her belly between them, and she put her hand flat on the crown of his great dark head. He shuddered under her palm. The shift, when it came, was slow. It looked like it hurt. She had never seen a wolf shift slowly before. He was holding it back as long as he could, because he did not yet trust himself to face her in the shape of a man. When it finished, Corian Vale was kneeling in the dirt of the lane in a torn cloak with his face in his hands. He was thinner than she remembered. There was gray at his temples that had not been there before. His shoulders were shaking. He did not look up at her. "Severin," he said. His voice was wrecked. "Severin, I am so sorry." She could not speak. "I have nothing to say to you that will undo it." I said the words. I said them in my own mouth. I told myself you would not hear, and I let myself say them anyway. And you heard them, and you walked out into the dark, and I. He could not finish. Severin reached out, slow, and took his wrists in her hands and pulled them gently down from his face. His eyes, when she finally saw them, did not look like the eyes of a king. They looked like the eyes of a man who had been on his knees in the lane long before he ever shifted into the shape that put him there. "Look at me," she said. He looked at her. "You are going to tell me everything," she said. "From your mother's deathbed. About Isel Morin. About the priest in the high crags. Why you did not trust me with any of it, Corian, not one word." "Severin, not now." She put her free hand on her belly, where his children had begun, again, to move. "First, you are going to stand up. Because there are wolves still in those trees, and a mistress in the Hollow March who wants me dead before you reach me, and we are not going to have this conversation over my body in the dirt." He stared at her. Then, slowly, with the dazed care of a man who had just been told he was allowed to keep living, the Alpha King of the Iron Reach got to his feet. There were, in fact, only 3 wolves left in the trees. Meredith took one of them on her way back from the smokehouse. Corian's escort, when it finally arrived, came in like a tide. 30 wolves of the king's own guard, fanning out around Brennhold without a word of order needing to be given. The villagers did not come out of their houses. Severin did not blame them. She sat on the stone step of her cottage with a blanket around her shoulders, and Corian sat on the dirt at her feet with one hand resting, very lightly, on the edge of the blanket. He had not asked permission to touch her. He had only put his hand there, the way a man steadies a candle in a draught, and she had not moved it away. He had been talking for almost an hour. He had told her about his mother, the night the old queen had taken his hand in hers in the sick room and made him swear on the blood of his line that he would honor the promise to the Hollow March if she could not. He had been 17. His mother had been dying of a wound the healers could not close. He had said yes because he could not say no to a dying woman holding his hand. He had told her about the priest in the crags, the 8 months of letters, the salt barrel, the moment, in his study, when he had read the threat against his old aunts and his sister's children, and had understood that he was going to have to put a woman called Isel Morin in a chamber across from his own, and pretend, for the eyes of a spy he could not yet identify, that he had decided to honor the oath. He had told her about the night he had said the words. He had told her how, the moment the silver cup struck the stone floor in the corridor, he had known someone was there. He had not let himself hope it was her. He had let himself hope it was a serving girl, a guard's child, anyone whose grief he could survive. When he had stepped out of the study and seen the wine pooled on the flagstones in the lamplight, he had known. "I ran," he said. "I ran down 4 flights. I shouted at Halric at the lower postern to tell me which way you had gone, and Halric, the old fox, lied to my face. He said you had gone to the upper village. He sent me an hour up the wrong road. He bought you that hour because he thought I had hurt you, and even with my wolf in his face, he would not give you up." Severin thought of old Halrich. Mind the bridge at Lore's Bend. "You should have told me," she said quietly. "About the oath. From the first night. I know. You should have given me the choice, to stay and fight it with you. Or to go, knowing why. I know. You took the choice from me, because you were afraid I would leave. I know." She opened her eyes and looked down at the crown of his head. He was not making excuses. He was sitting on the dirt at her feet and saying, "I know," to every wound she named, and she understood that this was the closest a man like Corian Vale had ever come to crying uncle. "I would not have left," she said. "I know that too. Now." She put her hand on his hair. It was the first time she had touched him as a man since the night before the harvest moon. He went very still beneath her palm, as if any larger movement might break the small, thin thing that had begun to grow back between them. "Corian." "Yes. I have something to tell you." He lifted his face. His eyes were wet and terrified, and his eyes were the eyes she had loved. "I know," he said. "You do not know." "Severin," he said. His voice was barely a voice. "Your belly, my heart. I have eyes. I have known since the moment you stood up in the lane." She took his hand and pressed it flat against the curve of her belly, and she said, very carefully, "Two." He stopped breathing. He stared at her belly with the look of a man who had just been told he was allowed something he had stopped letting himself want a long time ago. "Two," she said again. "A boy, a girl. The midwife is sure." His face crumpled. She pulled him forward against her belly, and he laid his cheek against the curve of it. And beneath both their hands the children began to move. Quick, urgent kicks. Two small lives announcing themselves to the man whose voice they were hearing for the first time outside her body. Corian Vale made a sound she did not have a word for. He stayed with his face against her belly for a long time. When at last he lifted his head, he was a king again. She did not know how he did it, how he put the king back on, in the space of 2 breaths, when there were tears still on his face. But she watched him do it, and she understood that this was a man putting on the armor he was going to need for what came next. "Marith," he said without turning his head. The shield warden came forward at once. "My king." "How long until first light?" 4 hours, my king." "How many men can you have on the road to Kaldemar by then?" "All 30, my king." "Send a rider ahead, to the voice. Tell him I am bringing the queen home." Marith's amber eyes flickered for the briefest moment to Severin's face. Then back to her king. "My king. There is a thing the rider must be told." "What thing?" "The Moran are not still in the Hollow March." The air around Corian changed. The way the air changed in the woods before a storm. Where are they?" "In Kaldemar, my king." "Explain." "Isel Moran rode out of Kaldemar the morning after my lady disappeared. She did not return to the Hollow March. She rode to the southern keep of House Veyrin, where she has been for the last 4 months. The Veyrin opened their gates to her. So have the Melos. So have the Drun. The entire Southern Coalition has put its banners under hers. She has been calling herself the regent of a king who has gone mad. 6,000 warriors, my king. Kaldemar still flies your banner, but the coalition has been moving on the city for 3 days. They are perhaps 4 hours behind the walls now." Corian closed his eyes. When he opened them, the amber in them had gone dark as wet bronze. "They moved," he said softly, "the moment they understood I had ridden out myself." "Yes, my king. They are betting they can take Kaldemar before I can return to it." "Yes, my king." Severin had begun to shake, very slightly, beneath the blanket. She had spent 4 months believing herself to be the small private wreckage of one man's silence. She understood now that she had not been small at all. She had been the keystone of something much larger, and her disappearance had pulled the keystone out of a wall the Moran had been waiting 9 years to bring down. She was not the wound. She was the war. "Corian." "Yes, my heart." "How fast can your horses make Kaldemar?" "With my lady on the saddle in front of me, 2 days." "Then do not ride without me." "Severin." "I am not staying behind a wall again. If Kaldemar falls before you reach it, every person in that fortress who ever laid a kind hand on me will be dead by the time you ride through the gate, and I will not sit in a healer's cottage in a fen and let that happen, because your men think I am too soft to ride. I have been on the wrong side of your protection once already, Corian. I will not be on it twice." He held her eyes for a long moment. Then, slowly, he lowered his forehead to the curve of her belly one more time. "All right," he said. He stood. He turned to Marith, and his voice when he spoke was the voice that had ruled the Iron Reach for 9 years. We ride for Kaldemar in 1 hour, and when we come through the Southern Coalition's lines, Lady Marith, I want them to understand one thing clearly. My king. That they were never going to be fighting only the king. He looked down at Severin. They were going to be fighting his queen. They came in sight of Kaldemar at the end of the 2nd day, with the sun behind them and the smoke ahead. The fortress stood on its high black rock the way it had stood for 200 years. Its banners still flew. But the smoke was rising from 3 different points along the lower town, thin gray columns leaning south in the evening wind, and the road below the rock was a black, moving line that Severin understood, after a moment of looking, was an army. They have not breached the walls, Marith said. No, Corian said. Not yet. He had not let her down off the saddle in 2 days. He had let her sleep against his chest at the brief halts. He had fed her bread and dried apple from his own hand without breaking the pace of the column. The saddle of the king's own horse, with the king's own arm around her, was the safest place in the Iron Reach at this moment, and she was carrying twins. She had let pride lose that argument before it began. A scout came pounding up the road from the head of the column. My king, the voice has held the upper gate. The south wall is sound. The coalition is encamped along the river road. How many? 6,000 by our count, my king. Possibly more in reserve in the Veyrin holding 2 leagues south. Have they made a move on the wall? Not yet. They are waiting. Corian's arm tightened, very slightly, around Severin's waist. Waiting for what? The scout glanced at Severin, then back at his king. For you, my king. They have offered terms. You ride down to the bridge alone and surrender your crown to the Lady Iselle, and in return, they will spare the city and every soul in it. And if I do not? Then by their word, they put the lower town to the torch within the hour. They have set fires already to make the threat plain. The smoke rising in the evening wind, the thin gray columns. Severin had not understood at first what she was looking at. Now she did. My king, Marith said. It is a feint. They have crossbow positions along both sides of the bridge road. They will not let you reach the bridge alive. I know, Corian said. He did not move. He was looking at the smoke. Severin felt something inside her go very quiet. Not the children. Not the silver mark. Something older than either. The same thing that had opened in her chest on the lane in Brenhold. It was the part of her that did not run. Corian, my heart. Put me down. No, put me down. Severin, I am not going to ride to the bridge. I am going to take the city back from the inside. There is a way through the cliff caves on the eastern face. Marith and 40 of my wolves are taking it within the hour. I am going with them. You are going to stay in the column with... Listen to me. He stopped. She turned her head against his shoulder so she could look up at him. His face above hers was the face of a man who had already decided to spend himself in order to keep her out of a city that was burning. She did not love that look on it. You cannot ride to the bridge, she said. But I can walk to the bridge, Corian. His arm went rigid around her waist. No. They will not put a crossbow bolt in a pregnant healer walking down a road. Not with 6,000 of their own warriors watching. They have spent 4 months telling those warriors that their lady is a regent restoring order to a kingdom whose king has gone mad. They cannot put a bolt in the woman his wolves are riding behind without revealing what they are. And the moment they do not, they have to receive me. They have to let me past the bridge. And when they do, Iselle Morin will be on the other side. Severin, she is the keystone. Take her, and the coalition crumbles. Their warriors will not die for the Veyrin or the Maielos or the Drun. They will only die for her, because she has spent 4 months making herself the symbol of what she is not. Pull the symbol off the field, and the field empties. He was staring at her. You cannot walk into a coalition camp. I can, with Marith, with one other. 2 women and an unborn pair of children, walking under a flag of healer's truce. No coalition warrior alive will turn an arrow on that. They will pass us straight to her. And then, she said, I will be in the same room as Isel Marin. With this, she lifted her hand. The cold light came up out of her skin, without effort this time, soft and silvery, and the silver knife at her hip and the silver ring on her thumb both answered it the way a struck bell answers the strike. Corian's eyes widened. He had seen it once, in the lane in Brennhold, but he had been a wolf then. Now, in the shape of a man, he was understanding it for the first time. "What is that?" he said. His voice was very low. "I do not know yet. My grandmother did. She gave me her ring on the day she died and told me I would understand it when I needed to. I think I am beginning to." Severin. Corian. If I walk down to that bridge under truce, and Isel refuses to receive me, every warrior in her coalition will see her refuse to receive a pregnant woman asking for parley. She will lose the field by the next dawn. If she does receive me, she will receive me in a tent, within range of her own commanders, and I will be in arm's reach of her, and the war will end in that tent. And if she puts a knife in you anyway, then I will be the woman who walked into the camp of the regent under truce and was murdered in front of her own warriors, and you will have your war won the moment the news reaches their ranks. Either way, the field empties. There is no other way to take Kaldemar tonight without the lower town in flames. His jaw worked. He looked at Marith over the top of Severin's head. The shield warden, who had ridden 2 days at her king's left flank, met his eyes and gave him, very slightly, the smallest nod a soldier could give. "My king, my lady is right." He shut his eyes. When he opened them, there was something in his face Severin had only ever seen there twice before. Once in the larch grove, the night he had told her she was his fated mate, and once on the lower battlement 4 months ago, when she had not turned to see it. "Severin Thalis," he said quietly, "I am the Alpha King of the Iron Reach, and I have ruled it for 9 years, and I have never in those 9 years been given a command by a person on the back of my own horse. You are not being commanded, Corian. No? You are being asked to trust me." He looked down at her for a long moment. "Marith, my king, take her down to the bridge. Take Halna of the Voices' house with you. She is a midwife. The warriors will recognize the herb mark on her cloak. No one will challenge a midwife under truce. Take no weapons that show. Send the truce flag in advance. Walk slowly. Be seen. My king. And if Isel Moran gives the order to put a hand on either of them," he broke off. "My king. Then I will be in the cliff caves with 40 of my best, and the coalition will learn in the hour that follows what an Alpha King does to the people who put a hand on his queen." He lifted Severin down from the saddle himself. He held her against his chest for the space of 2 breaths. He pressed his forehead to hers, the way he had pressed it the night before the harvest moon, and the silver mark on her hip, and the silver mark she had bitten into his shoulder, once in a larch grove, burned between them in answer. "Come back to me," he said. "I will. Severin, I love you." "I know," she said. "I have always known. Even on the worst nights." She turned away before he could see what was on her face, and she walked down the road toward Marith and the dark horse and the woman called Halna, and behind her she heard Corian Vale say, very softly, in the voice of a king sending his queen into a tent he could not enter, "Go." The truce flag was raised on the river road as the sun touched the western hills. 3 figures walked down toward the bridge. The shield warden in her riding coat with her sword sheathed and bound with a green cord. The midwife Halna with her green cloak and her empty hands held visible. And between them a dark-haired pregnant woman who walked, despite the swell of her belly, with the steady measured stride of a woman who had spent 4 months walking the bog paths of Brennhold at dawn. The coalition lines saw them. A long murmur ran the length of the army, then a long silence. Then, from the great pavilion at the center of the camp, a single small figure in a white silk gown stepped out into the failing light, and Severin Thalis finally laid eyes on Isel Moran for the first time in her life. The cold light beneath her skin began, very softly, to rise. The pavilion of Isel Marin stood at the center of the coalition camp, like a small white island in a sea of dark wool. The silk of it was the same white silk Severin had seen 4 months ago, only the hem of a dress disappearing through a private door. But Severin had remembered the white the way the bitten remember the snake. Isel Marin stood before it. She was smaller than Severin had expected. Slender as a reed, with hair the color of pale honey braided severely back from a narrow, clever face. She did not look like a woman who had pulled 6,000 warriors into a war. She looked like a woman who had read very carefully, from a very young age, every book that had ever explained how to do it. "Mistress Severin," she said. Her voice was still smooth as poured silk. "You are kind to come." The coalition warriors lining the road behind Severin had gone silent. Severin could feel the weight of their watching against her shoulder blades. That was, after all, the point. "Lady Isel, I came under Healer's truce. I would speak with you. Privately, if you will allow." "Of course. Will you come inside?" "If my companions may stand at the entrance." "They may." Isel held the flap of the pavilion aside herself. Marith, at Severin's left shoulder, did not move. The shield warden's amber eyes had been on Isel since the moment the flap had opened, and they had not blinked once. Halna the midwife, at Severin's right, was murmuring under her breath what Severin recognized as the third of the old healer's blessings, the one given to a woman walking into a confinement she might not walk out of. Severin laid her hand briefly on Marith's wrist. At the entrance, no further." "My lady, I will call you if I need you." "My lady, you will not need to call." Severin walked into the pavilion with her hand on the curve of her belly, and the silver ring warm on her thumb, and the cold light rising very gently, like a tide that had been waiting 4 months for this hour. Isel let the flap fall closed. Inside, the pavilion was lit by a single brazier and 3 hanging lamps. There was a writing desk strewn with maps, a low couch with a fur thrown over it, a cup of dark wine half drunk on the desk. Isel turned to face her, and her clever, narrow face was no longer wearing the small, perfect curve. "You are not what I expected," she said. "No?" "I thought he would have chosen someone louder." Severin said nothing. Isel walked a slow half-circle around her. Not too close. The way a woman walks around a piece of furniture she is considering buying. "You came alone, under truce, with a midwife. A clever choice. The warriors in this camp have wives. They will not stand for a midwife to be harmed in their ranks. You bought yourself an audience with that midwife. I respect it. I would have done the same. I came to ask you to call off your warriors." She laughed. It was the same laugh Severin had heard through the oak door. Soft. Low. The laugh of a woman alone with a thing she was certain of. "And in return?" "In return, I will walk back across that bridge and tell the king you wish to surrender the regency you have not been given. He will not put you to death. He will exile you and your house to the eastern islands, and your line will live, and your warriors will go home to their wives, and the lower town of Kaldemar will not burn. And if I refuse, then I will leave this pavilion, and one of 2 things will happen. Either you will give the order to harm me, and the warriors at the entrance will see it, and your coalition will fall apart by morning. Or you will let me walk back unharmed, and the king will come down through the cliff caves before midnight, and your coalition will fall apart by morning regardless. In neither case, do you keep what you came for." Isel had stopped walking. She was looking at Severin with a different expression now. The clever amusement had thinned. What was underneath it was harder. "You think I came for the throne," she said. "Did you not?" "I came," Isel Marin said quietly. "For him." There was a small silence. "I was 18 when his mother died and the oath came into my house. I had loved Corian Vale since I was 12 years old, and I waited 9 years. 9 years. I waited while he buried himself in border wars and any work he could find that would keep him out of the Hollow March. Every spring I sent the same letter to Kaldemar reminding him gently of the oath, and every spring his voice sent the same letter back saying, 'The king sends his regrets.' 9 years of regrets, healer. She took a step closer. And then he found you. A river girl. A kitchen healer. And in the first months he was writing letters to a hermit about how to break the oath my mother died believing would put my children on the throne. Tell me, Severin Thalis, what was I supposed to do? Not this. What else? Anything else? Isel's mouth moved. It was not a smile. There was no anything else. He chose you. He never once chose me. He sat across from me at his own desk and said the words he said about you. A passing favor, he called you. He has never said one word he did not mean about me. I understand. Then you understand that I cannot call off the warriors. Because if I call them off, I have spent 9 years and a salt barrel and a hermit's life on nothing. I will not have spent it on nothing. Isel, listen to me. The other woman did not move. You have made yourself, Severin said quietly, into the thing you hate. You spent 9 years hating a king who would not give you the choice of his own heart. And in those 9 years, you became a woman who would take from another woman the choice of her own life. I walked out of his fortress because of words you told him to say. I lived in a fen for 4 months because of words you told him to say. You did to me, Isel, what you have spent your whole life accusing him of doing to you. The only difference is that he never knew he was doing it. You knew. You knew every day. Isel's narrow, clever face went still. For a long moment Severin thought she had reached her, that something had finally broken open, the way the surface of a pond breaks when a stone falls through the ice. And Severin took half a breath to say what she would say next. The offer about exile. Isel's hand came out of the fold of her white silk gown with a silver knife in it and put the knife into the side of Severin's belly. She did it very fast, with the small, clean motion of a woman who had practiced it in front of a mirror, perhaps for 9 years. Severin's body folded forward over the blade. She heard, a long way off, Marith's voice rising in a shout outside. She heard, much closer, the small, soft sound of her own breath leaving her. She felt the silver knife slide free of her side as Isel stepped backward, calm as a woman closing a book. And under that, through that, around that, the cold light rose. It came up out of Severin's skin not as a thin sheet this time, but as a great slow pulse, the way a star pulses, and the silver ring on her thumb and the silver crescent at her hip, and the silver of the knife still wet in Isel's hand all answered it together with a single high, clear note Severin had never heard before. A note like a struck bell that rang through the silk of the pavilion and through the wool of the coalition tents, and out across the river road to the cliff caves on the eastern face of the high black rock where 40 wolves were already moving in the dark. The note went into Isel Marin where she stood. It went into her the way a key goes into a lock. Isel's eyes, clever, narrow, 9 years patient, opened very wide. The silver knife fell out of her hand and struck the rug with a small dull sound, and Isel Marin sat down very slowly on the rug beside it, and put her hands flat on the wool, and looked up at Severin Thalis with the look of a woman who had just understood, far too late, what she had been arguing with. "Oh," she said, and then her eyes rolled white, and she fell sideways onto the rug, and she did not move again. Severin's legs folded under her. Marith was through the pavilion flap before her knees finished folding, and the shield warden caught her under both arms and lowered her, very carefully, to the rug. Halna already there with her hands on the wound and her green cloak folded against the bleeding. "My lady, look at me." Severin looked. "The blade was silver," Halna said, very fast, very calm. "Silver does not poison. The wound is in the side, not the womb. The children are not struck. The children are not struck." "Corian," Severin whispered. "He is coming, my lady. Listen." Severin listened. Outside the pavilion, very far away, very close, she could not tell which, she heard wolves. Not 3 wolves. Not 30. Hundreds. The high black rock of Kaldemar had opened like a struck shell, and out of every cave and postern on its eastern face, the wolves of the Iron Reach were coming down in a tide, and ahead of all of them came a black wolf with eyes the color of old honey, and the coalition warriors in his path were not lifting their weapons against him, they were stepping aside. The high, clear note that had rung out of the pavilion had rung through them too, and they had understood, in the part of them older than any oath any house had ever sworn, what the note meant. The note had meant, the Queen has been struck. There were some things even 6,000 warriors of the Southern Coalition would not stand for. The flap of the pavilion was torn off its post. Corian Vale, in the shape of a man, he had shifted as he ran, somewhere on the bridge, came through the opening with blood on his face and his shirt half torn away, and he saw Iselle Marin on the rug and did not look at her, and he saw Séverine on the other rug with Halna's hands red against her side, and he made a sound she had only heard from him once before in her life, on a battlement in the cold spring stars. He fell to his knees beside her. Séverine. I am not dying, Corian. Séverine. Listen to me. Halna says I am not dying. The children are not struck. Listen to her, not to me. My mouth is not reliable at present. Halna, working fast, said without looking up. She is not dying, my king. The blade was silver. The wound is shallow on the side. I am closing it now. She will need to be still for a month. Corian put his forehead against Séverine's. He was shaking. A month is nothing. A month is a gift. Corian. The bond. He went still. Séverine lifted her hand, slow, because lifting was hard, and laid her palm against the side of his throat, where the silver crescent of the bite she had given him once lay under his torn collar. It is not finished, she said. We started it in the larch grove and we never finished it. I want to finish it now, before anything else can come between us. You are bleeding. I am closing. Halna said so. My heart, the proper right is... I do not want the proper right. I want you. I want it now. On this rug. In this tent. While the woman who tried to make us each other's grave is lying 3 paces from us. I want every wolf in this kingdom to know that the bond between us was finished here. Do you understand? He understood. He laid her back, very gently, on the rug. He put his hand on the silver ring on her thumb. He lifted the hem of her dress and laid his mouth against the silver crescent at her hip, and Séverine set her teeth, very carefully, into the silver crescent at his throat. The bond, when it closed, did not feel like fire. It felt like a door closing on a room she had been standing outside of. Inside the room was every moment of him she had not seen. The night his mother had died. The night the salt barrel had come back to Kaldemar. The morning he had read the hermit's letter for the last time and put it in the brazier with his own hand. The hour, 4 months ago, on the battlement, when he had watched her vanish down the wet road. Inside the room was every moment of her he had not seen, either. Her grandmother on the day the silver ring had been pressed into her palm. The first time she had set a broken bone, alone, at the age of 15. The night under the larch trees when he had told her she was his fated mate, and she who had said yes, only yes, and never told him the rest, had been thinking, I would have followed you anyway. With or without the bond. I would have followed you anyway. Corian's whole body shook against hers when that last thing reached him. He had not known. He knew now. When at last he lifted his head, the cold light beneath her skin went out the way a candle goes out when the wick has finished. The high, clear note went quiet. Outside the pavilion, the warriors of the Southern Coalition had begun, without an order being given, to lay down their weapons in the road. The autumn after the children were born, Séverine Thylis walked into the larch grove on the southern slope of Kaldemar with a child on each hip, and her king beside her, and the shield warden 2 paces behind. And she watched her son and her daughter, the boy quiet, the girl already trying to put her small fist into her father's beard, see the larches for the first time. Iselle Marin had been buried in the Eastern Islands. The Southern Coalition had broken up within a month, every house bending the knee and being received without its banners burned. Old Halric, who had lied to his king's face on the night Severin had walked out of the lower postern, had been given the title of Keeper of the Lower Gate and a small house with a brazier of his own. He had died in the spring of the cough, with Severin's hand on his forehead and the small carved wooden hair from her old chamber in his palm. Severin had given the hair to him 3 days before his death. He had wept when he took it. The marks on her hip and on Corian's throat had healed at last into the silver crescents the old healers spoke of in their books. Not scars, but signatures, paired and answering, the kind of mark that a wolf carries to the grave and beyond. The cold light had not come back. She had asked her grandmother's spirit about it once, in a dream, and the old woman had said only, "It came when you needed it. It will come again when you need it. Do not call it. It is not a horse to be ridden, child. It is a bell to be rung." In the larch grove, on that autumn afternoon, Severin did not need any bells. She set her daughter down in the leaves. The little girl, 11 months old, with her father's old honey eyes and her mother's dark hair, took 4 wobbling steps across the leaves of the grove, her first 4 steps, the first her father saw, and put both her small hands flat on the trunk of the larch tree, where Corian had once told Severin she was his fated mate. The tree did nothing remarkable. It was only a tree. But Severin pressed her face against Corian's shoulder and cried very softly, the way a woman cries when she has finally been given a thing she had stopped allowing herself to want. "I almost did not come back," she said, "on the bridge, with Isel. I almost did not come back. I know, my heart. I want you to know something. Yes, I would have followed you anyway, even without the bond, even after everything. I know that too, the bond told me." She lifted her head. His face, in the autumn light, was the face of a man who had spent 4 months looking for her, and a long year of loving her since to make up for it. The streaks of silver at his temples that had come in during those 4 months had not gone away, and she did not want them to. They belonged on him. "Corian, promise me something. Anything. If anything ever comes between us again, any oath, any threat, any small clever woman with a knife in her sleeve, promise me you will tell me. Before. Not after. Before." He looked at her for a long time. Then he lifted her hand to his mouth and laid his lips against the silver ring on her thumb, the ring her grandmother had pressed into her palm on the day she died. "I promise you, Severin Thalis, before, always before, until the last day." The wind moved in the larches. Their daughter, with both small hands still flat on the tree, looked back over her shoulder at her parents and laughed, the small, clear laugh of a child who has just understood she can stand by herself. It was the only laugh in the larch grove that afternoon. It was enough. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this story stays with you a little while after the last word, that it reminds you that the worst night of a life is not always the night that tells the truth, and that the people who walk away in silence sometimes do so because silence is the only honest thing they have left, and that, very rarely, if they are lucky, and if the ones who love them are stubborn enough, they get to walk home again. May you be loved that stubbornly, and may you, when the time comes, be brave enough to walk back.